the moment we had Nancy Pelosi wearing the kente cloth, doing the Black Power fist in Congress, like it was over. It was so over.
Yeah.
Bad.
The media isn't going to tell you that detention center is doing these civil rights violations. They're not going to tell you that straight up. Media, you can't rely on mainstream media or any sources of that nature to tell you exactly what's going on.
Capitalism is sort of like the underlying, it's the economic base that we're in. And so it's like the underlying cause of like all the other sort of oppressions.
Like no matter how you contribute, no matter where you contribute, there is a place for everyone. So find that place and contribute.
I want to thank y'all for being here. There's a lot going on right now. And I think that these conversations are like more important than ever. Like I know y'all have like seen the recent news happening in Iran. Certainly the imperial boomerang is gonna boomerang, but yeah, I'm really glad that I got to like gather y'all here and have a super cool conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I can start us off. I want to formally welcome y'all to BlackStar Podcast. Hello. I have a super cool conversation with a pretty stacked panel here. 3 really deeply intelligent, deeply caring, active people in our community that know a lot about what's going on, who have been engaged in. And this is what we need. And I think that through all of our individual struggles, there's deep intersections. And acknowledging those and sort of combing through what those are, that's how we win. I think that there's a lot of divide and conquer that is used against us. And being able to see through that and break through it and come together is, again, how we win. So want to introduce all of you. I've got my good friend Sergio here. He's involved in a lot of super cool Latin and immigrant actions. I have a Roua, Palestinian activist, just amazing overall. I really enjoyed getting to know you and everything you've been doing. We also have Malcolm, who's off screen. He's like over there somewhere. Just overall super cool activist in our community as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Of course, yeah. So
Thank
I
you so
think
much for having us. We're so excited to be here.
I think it's really important to uh, first frame who we are and where we come into this global struggle. So I'm gonna ask all of y'all to just go around, just sort of say a bit about your individual issue area and how that relates to the global struggle.
Okay. Yeah, so I can go first. So I'm a student activist. So there's a lot of student-led organizations in my area. I'm in one of them, and I've helped out with a couple others. And we do a lot of class-based organizing. So that basically means having the perspective that like capitalism is sort of like the underlying, it's the economic base that we're in. And so it's like the underlying cause of like all the other sort of oppressions that people have to face, like racism, like imperialism, all of that. And so that means that in fighting against capitalism, we're also fighting against all of this, like we're also fighting against like all of these other forms of oppression. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And so that means a lot of collaboration, like with other activists like Sergio and Roua. So like we've collaborated with SJP a lot, for example, like hosting protests and solidarity with Palestine, because the Zionist genocide against Palestinians is an imperialist issue. And that means that it's an issue with capitalism, and so it's like on us as like workers and students to like defeat that. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I can go next.
Please.
Again, really happy to be here with y'all today. So my name is Roua, and I have also been a student organizer for the past several years and broadly involved in the Palestine liberation movement beyond that. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about Palestine and then about how that connects to some of these other broader global themes that we're seeing. But we know that the issue of Palestine is its core an anti-colonial, anti-imperial issue, and the Palestinian people have worked to free themselves from Israeli colonization for 77 years now, and broadly from greater influences, whether it be Zionist influences or Britain or beyond, for over 100 years now. And this, I think, is a component of the issue that, of course, we know will never go away, because it is the core, and it's also really, I think, the core, or the explanation or the understanding of the genocide that we've just seen or that we are continuing to see in Gaza over the past several years. This genocide, we know, is not um an anomaly, right? It is not a exception, but it is actually the core of Zionism. It is the core of the Zionist entity. It is the core of the US and US imperialism and colonialism. And I think that really is, how it connects to this theme of global struggle that we are here to talk about today. So many of these components, so many of these different dynamics that we've seen unfold in Palestine, in Gaza over the past few years, whether that be the use of AI, the testing of
Mhm.
weapons, the IDF and the US police, like all of these different things, the US continuing to restock Israel's weapons and funnel billions and billions of dollars into Israel as it's carrying out this joint US Israeli genocide. These all really point us to the importance and foundational understanding of global struggle and internationalism, and what it means to be fighting alongside each other towards building a world in which we don't see a genocide unfold in front of our eyes, and have no state power have a meaningful reaction to that.
Yeah, that's a
Well,
really good way of putting it.
yeah, that was perfect, honestly.
Yeah.
Y'all had a great intros. Mine is gonna be a lot I don't- a lot shorter. I'm basically I never really considered myself to be an activist, but until recently, I'm just gonna put this out there. I'm just a man who's fed up. I'm just
Mhm.
of everything that's going on, and to be put against what we are right now as students, as youth in this country, that kind of just made me want to speak up against injustices that happen across the country, and especially with our immigrant community here. So
Mhm.
for me, it's really coming from a perspective that I'm tired. Someone has to talk up. Someone has to do it, and each one of us are putting in the work to do that. So
Mhm.
that for me is where my perspective is. I'm here to talk about injustice, specifically about immigrant communities and PA, but more importantly, protect immigrants across the country. And we talk about solidarity. Each one of us has that ingrained in our heads that our struggles are all interconnected. So
Mhm.
if you advocate for one community, you gotta advocate for all communities. So that's my perspective when it comes to, for me, just talking about injustice or just talking about activism. So that's my perspective where I'm coming here to
Yeah.
speak up.
Yeah, a lot of great things were said there. I want to get at that idea of like who is and who isn't a activist, or like how you consider yourself an activist or not. I think it's a really interesting idea. But I can just say for myself to answer my own questions. Obviously, my interaction is much more so in the Black struggle and the Black liberation struggle. The civil rights movement never stopped, really. The abolition of slavery never happened in the full extent to which we understand it. It's reformed and restructured. And we see that very heavily in the policing system, in the prison system. We see that in the overall deep class struggles that we encounter. My readings have been much on incarceration and how the label of felon is used to weaponize mostly Black people, marginalized groups in general, but yeah, to through through war on drugs, through mass incarceration. These struggles never really stop.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Sergio, I want to focus on something that you said earlier, and I think it's again as a intro, it's important to frame sort of like who we are. You mentioned how you don't consider yourself an activist, and like I would agree personally too. Like I know I've had friends who've like called me active, call me an activist. I'm like because to me, an activist is someone who does activism as their occupation, like day in and day out. I think of like Malcolm X, right?
Hmm.
And I have like a sort of really high bar that I see people in that. And I do see that in you guys too, frankly. But it's sort of difficult for me to look at myself in that same sort of way. I haven't done enough to warrant that title. So I'm curious on what y'all's thoughts on that is.
That is a really good question. I think it's really interesting what you said about like kind of seeing activists as like an occupation because I do think I think you do see that sometimes like where activists sort of but there are people who sort of who really do like make it into like a career like where they're sort of getting paid for it.
Mm,
My first thought was, this is a horrible example. I cannot remember his name. He's the one that they call like Talcum X and everything. Sean something. He's that one activist who, like who's sorta did some stuff, like, with Black Lives Matter, but he was very shady about it. It was a whole thing. But, you know, like, the sort of, like, career activism.
mm,
I feel like and obviously not everybody is like that because also, like, I am technically an activist too, like, that's what I do. Um, but not as a job or anything. I'm not getting paid for it. But I also feel like it's, useful to sort of, like I kinda tend to describe myself as, like, an organizer first because I
mm,
feel like that sort of conveys, like, the same idea as in, like, I'm organizing alongside other people political actions to, like, you know, like, really, like, agitate the masses into, like, realizing, like, what's going on, like, what's wrong with our, you know, capitalist society, and, you know, getting them involved in ways to, like, fight back against that. But it also doesn't necessarily have like I think it's a bit harder. It's a bit easier to avoid the like connotations of like it being like a career or something that you're paid for. And you know, I don't have anything like if so, and I don't have anything like against like the word activist. I think it's just like I guess it's like a bit broader, and the word organizer is a bit more specific and a bit more applicable to my case. If that makes sense.
No, yeah, that is like a really great point. I didn't even consider in my own thinking. Like occupation implies some sort of financial compensation, and that's very much so not what I was trying to imply. But yeah,
Yeah, no, it's all good.
organizer is like a really good word to use as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And I think that, like, when I think about the difference to me between activist and organizer too, it's like activist or activism is I think more focused on, I guess, the mobilization aspect of political change. And what I mean by that is like things like protest, things where you're like mobilizing a large group of people towards a specific action at a specific like moment in time. Whereas organizer, and I think this is Malcolm, what you were saying, is like it's like longer term, protracted building of an infrastructure
Mhm.
that can bring in these mobilizations or the power that is built through mobilizations towards a like sustained trajectory.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, and I think that that's why like the reason I bring that up is like I think like activist is the word that probably is, at least in my experience, more used in the mainstream, right? Like organizer
Hmm.
I think is a little bit less used, but um I think that's because of this difference that we see, and not that activism or mobilization is not important, not at all, or like that is definitely something that we need because that's how you bring in, that's how you like encapsulate the agitation or the like power that the masses are feeling,
Hmm.
and at the same time, it's like then taking that into the vehicle of organization and being like taking going from mobilization to organization. And so I think like for myself, I also kind of think of myself as an organizer. And it's like mainly for that reason, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And it's like who's doing what. And I'm also thinking about this like point of paid, but political participation as a paid position. And I think that I know who you're talking about, Sean. I can't remember his name, but
Sean
I
King?
Sean.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I know like there's definitely like co-optation, I think, that happens regardless of the struggle and regardless who's taking it up, and honestly whether they're paid or not. Like I think unfortunately co-optation is something that we see across the line, but like it's also really interesting to think about kind of the history of paid organizers and how like
Mhm.
in really central organizations like the PLO, for example, they had paid organizers, and that was a way to sustain the struggle because it was like there was so much labor that is needed that people could, you had to have people like kind of dedicated to it. And so I guess I don't know if I have like a necessarily a point there, but just like in the spirit of conversation and like thinking about all these different themes, these are some of the thoughts that are coming to my mind. But yeah, I mean there is a history in the PLN, and I think in other organizations as well, where there were paid positions within organizations that is that again like I think the thought process or the intention was that they would like help sustain the struggle. And I think that the reason why I was thinking about that and I brought that up is because I think nowadays, because like we hear, I think also because of NGOs and like the kind of
Mhm.
reputation of being paid to do work, and it's like what's actually happening, like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of broader, and which I don't like super agree with as like a broad criticism regardless. But anyway, like those like the co-optation and payment piece, I think like are like hand in hand, basically, are put hand in hand.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think of like how that's been used historically, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
that idea of co-optation, particularly when people are being paid to do certain things, like we certainly see that all the time. I look at BLM for that exact thing. Like the moment we had Nancy Pelosi wearing the kente cloth,
Ugh.
doing the Black Power Fist in Congress, like it was over. It was so over that. And yeah, when I think that it's really difficult to sustain at Roua these movements without any sort of compensation. Like so many activists just die poor and hungry, and that's how they lived, and they die in that same way, and that's unfortunate. Deeply, and so, and I would like for that not to be the case, and I think that you need at times a level of support, albeit through being paid through NGOs or even just mutual aid. Like it's really difficult to sort of be a person existing again in this heavily financial capitalist system who's engaged in this work and you're doing it fully for free. And people who do it will do it, and like obviously these are important things and we should do it. But again, people gotta eat.
Yeah, I think that's a really like interesting like contradiction you just pointed out. Like on the one hand, people, need money for like basic necessities and stuff, but also activism or organizing doesn't inherently pay the bills. So sometimes people want to make it pay the bills and they find ways to do that. I think like another workaround is to sort of like pool whatever money you do have and sort of like use that, like, like having organization funds and stuff, or also
Mhm.
finding ways to like achieve a lot of results without necessarily having like a high budget. Having more numbers in your organization means that you're not like overworking like the same like few people. Like if one person needs to take a break to like take some extra shifts or whatever so they can pay the bills, there's another person who can like step in, that sort of thing. So I do think that it's possible to do it without being paid. I think it's nice when it's like unpaid, just because like one advantage of that is there's not like a financial incentive. You see this like with, let me see, I'm trying to think of an example. You see this like this with like larger unions sometimes, where they uh, there are some larger unions. I think like the AFL-CIO, they have like some Zionist connections, at least on the union leadership level, because it's like more financially stable, profitable for them if they like donate a bunch of like, union dues to Israel, which is really, really bad. And of course, I'm generally like pro union and everything, but I'm not pro that part.
Right.
And if there wasn't, I do think that if there wasn't that sort of like financial incentive to do that, then probably they wouldn't be doing it. So, I think there's also pitfalls to that. So, yeah.
I guess though, just one thing I'll really quickly add is I think Malcolm, you spoke to a piece of like bringing in more people and whatnot, and I think ultimately to me everything goes back to like what is like the sustainability of a struggle. While as you're saying, like I think reserving or like the grassroots and the grassroots character and like the political line or like the politics of the struggle, right? Like I
Hmm.
think there's always sure like you can make a struggle or you can make an organization, I mean, more sustainable by taking Zionist money, for example, and then you're losing like you're no longer organizing like in a revolutionary
Right.
manner. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
and so I think to me it all goes back to this question of sustainability, which I mean, again, is like we know that organizing is a long term project. And so, how can we build our organizations to be able to like capable to be able to sorry to handle all the different things that are going to come out?
Yeah, that's a rough one. Being able to like draw lines at like who you let into your coalition, and that's actually a huge topic I wanted to get into. Like, there's intersections between all of us, heavy overlap, but in the goal of again having these mass movements, we want to let people in. We want to have a big tent. We want to be inclusive to different ideas as long as we're aligned on the important things. It can be hard sometimes to draw those lines and say, okay, like you believe in X, you're a Y, therefore we're not going to let you in. And in some ways, I think that leads to like the leftist infighting we always hear
Uh,
on the internet, and I think that's deeply annoying. But like
mm.
it comes to a time where I'm like, yeah, you're not like a cool dude. Maybe we shouldn't be working in a aligned manner. So I in like which is more difficult when we're keeping a global mindset involved because there's more people, separate cultures, things like that. So I want to pose that question to you, like when you're considering where your lines are in your coalition building, where do you draw those lines, and like what are you able to accept it?
Yeah, I've been saving this, but for me, as when it comes to, I'm looking for Latino voices when it comes to, at least right now, advocating for immigrant protection, ICE protection, and whatnot. We need voices out there. We need people who can go back to the communities that are being most affected. So I look for just a simple understanding that, look, we're fighting against an oppressive system. Do you agree this system is oppressive? And generally, most people are on that page.
Hmm.
Mhm.
That's like a given almost. The finding people who really want to just like do that first, have a baseline that they do care. That's what I look for in terms of coalition.
Hmm.
And then if they want it, they want to follow through on that action and having that baseline, like, yeah, we do care about what's going on. They do want to build something, and then let's build something together.
Hmm.
I'm
Mhm.
personally, that's what I look for when I'm building coalition, and trying to find that right now is not it's kind of difficult where we are, but it's not like we're isolated. There's plenty of people out here who
Yeah.
do want to put in the work, who do want to help out any means necessary. It's just finding a way to like meet in the middle where we can actually build something together. So that's what I'd be really most I'm really looking for. It's hard, but it's
It is hard. It is hard.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that at least where we're at, it's pretty well organized. Like if you think this is hard, my hometown is just like I don't like it. It feels like nothing's going on compared to up here. But But yeah, I definitely in my organization, we also have like this question of like, how do we decide, like, how do we handle this whole leftist infighting thing? Which, oh my God, I don't use social media very much anymore. But as
Mhm.
somebody who used to, I used to be on Tumblr. That was horrible. Never going back. But that had a lot of the infighting that I'm sure we're all imagining right now. But in the real world, we're definitely pretty similar to like what Sergio just said, where it's like if you show up to like a protest or a teach-in or whatever, and that really resonates with you, you want to take that next step into sort of like organizing things yourself. Then people, and then you get to like then like we get your contact info, and then we keep in touch. So those and so like we let anybody like that sort of we let anybody like that, any of those supporters sort of like into like the loop, and then we'll be like, hey, there's another protest coming up, are you able to like volunteer time to help with this, blah blah blah. But then we also the way that the labor is allotted is also based on like how much experience people have,
Mhm.
and like sort of like what their strengths are, like what their politics are. And that's kind of like how we avoid having issues of like this like infighting and stuff, at least like on a leadership level. Because it would be pretty messy if somebody with just like very, very contradictory politics to ours was like our organization's like political leader.
Right.
That could cause some problems. So we try, and of course, not everybody within the organization agrees on every single thing. That's not
Mhm.
really possible. Everybody's, different. But we do have like we are like generally on the same page. And so that's kind of like how we tackle it. So we like on a leadership level, we try to like be like on the same page. And then like on a supporter level, it can just you don't like I described it as a communist organization because that's most of the leadership. I'd say most of the members are communist, but for the supporters, you don't have to be. You just have to be interested in helping us out, and you just have to be like able and willing to sort of like put that time in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I like have a lot to add. I guess what I would say is I think this is this is a big question. I feel like it depends on like what the context is and like what you're trying to
Okay.
do.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I think some of the dynamics that Sergio and Malcolm laid out, like I think like where in the organization are we talking about and like what is the purpose and also like what are the differences? Of course, as Malcolm just said, like there's going to be differences of opinions and that's not bad. That's actually good, right? Like we want
Hmm.
to encourage that because we want people to be able to like critically engage with with each other and discussion, and ultimately like what we want is what's going to lead us to a revolutionary future,
Right.
and we only get that through engaging with each other and building. But at the same time, it's like we don't want to be letting like there are red lines, right? And so
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it feels like it comes down to like what are the red lines, what are the core principles of the organization, where are places that there can be differences, where are places that there can't be differences, that sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, right as Malcolm said, like, we're not going to agree on everything. We don't have to. And like, we shouldn't. I think that is really easy, especially in this like online space, to get in an echo chamber and not engage with anyone who disagrees with you in ways that are significant. Like, I know I learned so much from other people, and that only happens through me not agreeing with them,
Hmm.
or not, at the very least, not understanding things at the level that they understand
Yeah, definitely. I think what said about like the red lines is
that.
also really important, because there are some things where unfortunately it's like if you have somebody with just politics that are just that contradictory, or behavior that's just that messy, you just can't have them stick around. In cases like that, we will like try to talk it out and everything, see if we can get on the same page. But if that doesn't work, we do kind of have to be like, okay, we can't keep you around anymore, I'm sorry. And just kind of hope that they go on their way, which, I think that very rarely happens because most people are chill and, most people are normal. Most people want to get along. But, it's also important to draw boundaries sometimes because,
Totally.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes you just aren't able to deal with that.
Because that's how infiltration happens. Like
Hmm.
we saw that in the Black Panthers in particular. Like
Hmm.
not having red lines in certain ways, you can't let everyone in.
Yeah.
And Malcolm you also mentioned having a like separation, I guess. I don't want to say of the standards, but that sort of seemed like the vibe between the politics of the leadership versus the members. I think that's fine as well. I think that especially for these actions that like you just kind of need boots on the ground, you need people who are going to be in real life doing work. You, if you're down for the cause, then you're down and you can help out. But for those who are going to be steering the org, we need you to be much more alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so within the global struggle, there's like one area I like really wanted to focus on here, and that is with policing. And we see policing occur impacting all of our communities in the same ways but in different forms between like the everyday police officers of Rome in America to ICE to the IDF. There is a clear through line with that, and I feel like more people are starting to wake up to that. There was a video from Zoran actually from a few years ago. Where he was talking about that like whole thing. But it basically says he's at a council meeting and he's talking about the NYPD, and he says when the NYPD has its boot on her neck, that it was laced by the IDF.
We have to make clear that when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, it's been laced by the IDF.
Which is a bar, which is a super cool bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, through policing in and of itself, I mentioned mass incarceration. There's obviously the prison industrial complex and the private prison industry, which of course has a super huge through line here as well. Rowan mentioned the surveillance aspect. Obviously, Palantir is has government contracts between police and ICE, and sort of the launch point for them was in Palestine. So like it's super not hard to see where like surveillance involves itself with the policing and as a way to weaponize and further marginalize each of us. I wanted to just sort of just throw that out there and sort of like where you see policing as a broad industry and institution. How does that interact with your individual struggle?
Yeah, so that is a super good question. So I don't like police in like any capacity. I mean,
On
even
the record.
before, yeah, for the record, yeah, I mean, even before I got into organizing, just like being African American, just, always like from a pretty young age, I was like, okay, these guys are like not my friends. I remember like, reading about like Michael Brown
Mhm.
and like Philando Castile and Breonna Taylor um, and on the news and just being like, okay, this is not working. And over time, I very slowly went from like, oh, the police can be reformed to, yeah, no, they just got to go. Because I think, and this ties into the prison issue too. Because I think the problem is like police, they exist to serve like
Capital.
capitalist interests first. So and so I do think that if you're I think that part of being a communist means like opposing um just like the police institution, just like in every capacity. as it exists like in under like a capitalist system. And so by that same token, I'm really not a fan of the prison system either. I do think that the way that prisons function right now is just generally bad. It needs to be heavily reworked at minimum. And so my organization has, done like organizing like on that front, especially as it relates to like the increase like in ICE terror since Trump got elected, which it was always pretty bad. Like these detention centers aren't new, but it's definitely like intensified and I think become like more visible like in media and stuff. And so like one really big like issue that's been like affecting Pennsylvanians is like Moshannon Valley. It's a detention center. It's like the conditions there are just like really horrible. People have like died or like committed suicide there. And the people in there, they're basically all their only quote unquote crime is being just like a working immigrant. That's it, right? So they should not be in there at all, and the detention center shouldn't exist. And so, part of organizing has like we've done a lot of like protests and stuff against that detention center and against detention centers nationally because no, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but they're all uh just further serving to oppress working people, to divide working families for, capitalist benefit and for racist benefit in them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually just learned about Shannon recently by a recent action.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like I was like, whoa, why are we? What's going on here? It's like right next to us,
Yeah.
and it's like we see these things online all around the country, and we're horrified, and we're obviously doing actions to abolish those outside of our backyards, but it's one right here. So it's like, what do we do about that? Sergio, I'm sure you have a lot more to say on that.
No, I say for me, the main thing about how Shannon works and all these detention center works, they put them in the middle of nowhere so that people don't realize it's in their community or in their backyards.
Mm-hmm.
And it's done explicitly just so it goes unnoticed, these civil rights violations, these human rights violations. It's all done very intentionally. It's all done very maliciously so that we don't talk about it, so that we aren't aware of what's going on. And the fact that's happening here it just shows how malicious they are in their intent. I've focused, at least in my activism, when I do decide to speak up, then that across the board, because I don't want that to go silent.
Mhm.
I don't want that my university or anybody to just who lives here to know like this is exactly what's going on and we have to do something about it. So yeah, this is like a national issue. It's not just, but it is a local issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Like everyone needs to be aware of
yes.
what's happening in their local community, not just move silently, think things are happening in major cities or just happening and where the media decides to highlight. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
happening in silent. The media isn't going to tell you that detention center is doing these civil rights violations. They're not going to tell you that straight up. Media, you can't rely on mainstream media or any sources of that nature to tell you exactly what's going on. So you have to be proactive in searching for what's going on around in our communities, and that's a huge issue. Shannon is crazy, not just crazy. It's insane how exploitative they are. In fact, speaking on detention centers, not only are they just tagging immigrant communities here, or just simply looking for opportunities to work, they're attacking people because they want their labor. And one thing on top of that too is people in Moshannon detained right now. They are forced to work there too right now.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something across detention centers across the board, and something that they want to do as well in Florida. And what's the detention center, like the new one they hype up?
I think they've been calling it Alligator Alcatraz, that
Yeah,
one. Ugh,
yeah,
yeah.
Which is such like a deeply cartoony like 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 evil and like they want to be evil way to even
I
talk about
know.
it.
But one huge thing about that though is they want the people who are they're being detained there. They want them to work in farmlands, and they're having like this almost indentured servant contract where if they do decide to work, they'll have an earlier sentence. Like they'll be able to access citizenship quicker. So
Yeah,
now
wow. That's literally indentured servitude. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
sounds like slavery to me.
it's literally quite literally it's like
Indentured servitude is slavery with extra steps. So
that's literally what they're trying to build right now in Florida. They're trying to exploit people um, for their labor back in these communities because at the end of the day, their labor is valuable and they need it to in order for just to gain more profits. And that's how the system runs. The system runs under exploitation and free labor across prisons and detention centers. So this is just an expansion of that, and they're doing it openly now.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, between two super great points you mentioned there were the media aspect and the labor aspect. So obviously, CNN is covering a concentration camp happening in central PA. They don't care, right?
Hmm.
That's why we're watching BlackStar Podcast, and you gotta listen here and like we cover it. But yeah, like obviously, like these are not headline stories, and that's why engaging on the local basis is the important part here. I mentioned these aren't national; these are local issues. These are the same thing. Local issues are national. National is global, where it's all one interconnected system
Mhm.
here. And on the labor, that's obviously like the main goal here between the prison industrial complex. They want free labor and they want slavery back, and
Hmm.
Too. That
they're
that
gonna do what they can to oppose that.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether they have to label you as an immigrant and you're illegal, okay, cool, perfect. New population. We need a designated population to use to extract labor from,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the only goal here.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned towards the beginning, that's also like how just like you mentioned that slavery never even went away in the first place because of the 13th Amendment. They were like slavery is abolished unless you're a criminal.
But
And that's how the prison industrial complex has worked. And so now they're just actually I'm not sure when the first immigrant detention centers were built in the US. So that's something to look into. Definitely at least at the very least like with this increased level of ICE terror in prison, and imprisoning people in detention centers. It's definitely like they're adding on to that, at least to a greater degree than they were like in the past few years.
yeah,
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
at the very least, since before like Japanese internment camps. So like
Oh,
these things, I'm not I'm not gonna say it because I'm not sure. Those were like the first iterations of these like modern day concentration camps, but like it has been as far as like government sanctioned warehouses where they house immigrants and extract labor and torture them. This is just kind of what we do.
yeah. That is
Um,
definitely an important part of the
yeah.
picture.
Roa, I want to throw it to you here. If you could just say what you want here, but especially focusing like on the IDF, and have anything to add on the surveillance aspect. I think it's a really interesting idea for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what y'all have covered already is so important, and really just like building on what y'all have already said, we know that like prisons and surveillance are tools that the state uses to both further oppress communities and also to repress like action against the oppression, right? And so I mean, like thinking about, for example, in the case of Palestine and Gaza, we know that like right now there is over 11,000 Palestinians that are
Mhm.
detained in Israeli prisons, which is a crazy number, right? And many of them are um, detained through something that's called administrative detention, in which there's no charge, there's no trial, they're just literally just sitting in a jail cell. And so this process is like a long-standing one. And also we know that like over the course of the genocide, it's not just been the bombing of Gaza, but it's also been the increase in arrests of Palestinians,
Mhm.
such that it's big. It's really was like a genocide behind bars.
Exactly.
The way that Palestinians were collected and treated and remain in prisons. And so really tying into what like you all have already laid out about the way that the state uses this tool to oppress and repress, and also the ways, of course, that we know that this is tied to capitalism also, as y'all talked about, and making money. I think it's just like it's so clear when we see whether it's like how policing and surveillance has impacted Black communities in the US, or immigrant communities in ICE detention centers, or Palestinian communities in the Zionist entity, you know, like all of these different places, it's really the same thread that you see through and through.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
now, actually, like I know, Jay, you were talking about surveillance, but you know, we're hearing Trump's plans for this like new Gaza and whatever, you know, like this like
Mhm.
plan that's being laid out for Gaza that really is so deeply militarized and surveilled, and it like almost dystopian in the way that they talk about it. And it's all based on this surveillance, right? And this AI technology that has been tested and continues to be built upon in like all three of these, or and more of these domains.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 But you mentioned this like administrative attention as like a silent genocide happening in historic Palestine. That lack of due process is it's like very similar to me to the warrants used by ICE. Like there's absolutely no even pretense of a crime. Your existence is a crime. Your presence is a crime. And as a way, again, a somewhat similar bit here is the ethnic cleansing of of a desired white land, and the surveillance used as a way to monitor who's coming in, who's coming out, which origin, which race they happen to fall into, and there is a arrest or there is a detention at a pre-crime, at the pretense of crime. Obviously, there's no trial involved. I think about a lot of the horrors that we see in Gaza, and it's the same thing happening here. Like this is a separate topic, but I'm deeply disgusted, frankly, at the liberal Zionists in America who are appalled at what's happening here in ICE, but they're not able to make that connection to okay, it's the same thing happening in Palestine. And the same lack of due process, the same ethnic cleansing that they might be able to acknowledge here, that same sympathy is not extended to Palestine. And there's like obviously multiple reasons why that might be, but yeah, these conversations are so important. Obviously, we're all on the same page here, but this is the form of education that other people should also be being taught.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think what y'all mentioned about like surveillance, and I think that's also like a really important like point, just like for in terms of like the way that like the US has like used Palestine and like especially Gaza as like a sort of like testing ground for like
Mhm.
surveillance, counter protester tactics that they then use in the US. My first thought was I don't remember how much this one has been used in Palestine actually, but like those flock security cameras that use
Drones.
like yeah, and like they use like AI to like track people's license plates,
Mhm.
which is really bad. I don't like that. More specifically, a lot of police departments have bought and made use of flock cameras. And so obviously, you know, they're not going to do anything good with that information. And I think it's really important to, and also I think actually maybe a more pressing example is how some like US police departments will do training in Palestine, like with Israeli
Yes.
police.
Yes.
That's disgusting. I think stuff like that really highlights how, in a lot of ways, like the worst ways, the US and Israel are two sides of, like, they're almost identical. They're both just like capitalist, like imperialist states that oppress people in largely the same ways. And so when you mention like the liberal Zionists who are like anti-ICE, but then still pro-Israel, I think that right there is a really good example of why you need to have an understanding of capitalism as like the root of all this oppression. Because if you're leaving that out, then that makes it a lot easier to miss the connection between ICE and the IDF. But if you notice that connection, like, wait, these people are serving like the same, these people are both like these states are both like bourgeois ran, and you know what I mean? Then it starts to become a lot clearer why they're both horrible.
Yeah, and I think maybe just the one quick thing I'll add to that is like with what y'all are talking about, like with the example of liberal Zionists, like we know like Zionism as an ideology necessitates the murder of Palestinians, right? And the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and the oppression of Palestinians. And so like these liberal Zionists, I think with what like I think the connections that y'all are naming are so important. And it's like they don't see the connections because it's like their ideology. Like that's like what that's like it's not
That's the
that they
point.
just like don't happen to see them. It's like they see them and it just like doesn't matter, right? And so I think that's why this conversation that we're having about the global struggle and how these things are how we like struggle alongside each other and like how we see the same threads of oppression through all of our communities and through all of our struggles is so important because it's the people that we have to educate that who don't see that we need to get in.
I guess my one question is like what I'm like dealing with is how do you get people to understand that connection and just kind of like spreading that message across? I feel like more people are starting to wake up to that reality now. I especially see it more like obviously I'm in my own echo chamber on social media. The fact that Israel in itself has become as unpopular as it is kind of just shows like the youth and how we're spreading this message across that no we're not gonna agree with a genocide. We're not gonna stand by and all this going on right now. But that's I want to also how we elevate that message of this disagreement to like actual action. That's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great question on how do you make people see the connection here. Something that I was taught is to find what people do care about and
Yeah.
to have a really pinpointed, individualized approach to each, and like it's and that it works because we all of us struggle under the capitalist system, regardless of if you support it or not. So we can say, oh yeah, gas prices are super high. Oh, that's crazy, right? Like and it's even easier, in my opinion, to talk to liberals on this, even if they are Zionists, because within my work I do in sort of the pro-choice world on abortion, but I do a lot of work in showing people on like, okay, you don't have autonomy over your own body, right? You don't have access to healthcare. You don't have access if you do have access to abortion, you might not be able to have a hospital in your area. If you're talking to someone in a deep red, very rural area, they know what it's like to go without having a hospital, a grocery store, a bank in their immediate space, and having that lack of infrastructure and making the connection of like, oh, you know who else doesn't have a hospital? People in Gaza, right? Every university in Gaza has been leveled, right? The healthcare that you have here that you may take for granted, even the other people across the world have even less than you do. And I think that using that as a way to sort of put a mirror to them and show them how they may actually be privileged, even given the suffering that they do endure. That's effective to them because they see themselves in other people. Now, to be clear, I wish that people would see the humanity in others without having to see themselves in them. Like, I think that, suffering is bad. Women having to give birth without anesthesia is bad. Not having incubators for infants is bad, regardless of if you've encountered a similar scenario yourself. You should care about that, but not everyone is like that. So at the very least, making the connection to things that they do care about, in whichever way that they are struggling, that's just one way that you can make that.
Yeah, and I think kind of building off that, like, I think unfortunately, the way that the oppressor like makes it so that people don't see those connections, right, is by, or one of the ways is by dehumanizing the other to the point where it's like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't like they don't even people aren't even thinking about what it means to give birth without anesthesia, right? Like it's like all of like these things that you just mentioned that would seem like duh, right? It's
Mhm.
because people are not seen as human or because they've been dehumanized to the point where it's like, oh, they deserve it or they whatever, they brought this upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where like part of what y'all are saying about like making those personal connections and then also just like political education and raising political consciousness broadly. I know that's like a really general answer, but
Yeah.
I think that's why education is so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like y'all have like described like agitation in a nutshell, really. And like when I say agitation, I mean it in the communist sense of like not like agitating like getting on people's nerves, but agitating as in like making them realize like these connections, like making them realize how like they or other people have been wronged by like capitalism or like white supremacy or Zionism or whatever. And then like really motivating them to like do something about it. And so I think like being able to like successfully agitate people, whether at a protest or whether in a one-on-one conversation, I think that's like really how you get people like into organizing. And then once they're in organizing, you want to you want to have opportunities to like keep you want to be able to like expand your ideological knowledge also. I know like just speaking on how like our organization does things. There is a lot of communist literature out there that is both very important and also maybe not like well understood, well studied, whatever, for because one reason or another. And so, we like to have chances to sort of like have like study days or whatever meetings to like sort of like sift through this stuff and be like, we pick a piece and we go through it and then we talk about like what we think about it, like how we understand it and everything. Because once you have like because it gives you more awareness of like what issues workers have faced like internationally and nationally, but then it also gives you a better idea. Like you can take those ideas from that literature and then figure out how to apply it to like what like your current situation. And then it's like a feedback loop. And so I think that's like the next step after you've once you've like agitated people. And yeah, and it's like a never ending process also because there's just so much to learn and there's so much to do.
Yeah, I think that all of those were great ideas. Just like one more question before we wrap up here, and this goes with what you were saying, Malcolm. Like, uh, obviously, we're tapped in. We
Mhm.
are always around people who are not everyone has like a fraction of the awareness that we do. And I'm really big on giving people on ramps. On like what can they do? How can they join? How can they make their world better? So like I'm curious, what do you think like is one thing that like the average person can do to better understand what the struggle is and how their struggle is involved in the larger global one?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think part of it is like definitely like try and make an effort to just sort of like see what organizations are in your area. There might be an organization that like you didn't even know about before now, but I know this is something I've noticed nationwide. A lot of organizations have Instagram accounts, and so then they'll post like updates about like, hey, we're having an action at so and so date and time. Come check it out. So I do think that's one option, like using social media to sort of figure out what's going on locally. And if that's not an option, I also think that this is a bit of a I know people tend to complain about this a little bit, like this sort of stereotype of like leftist book clubs doing nothing. But I would much rather people are in a leftist book club reading something than
That might be- yeah.
and just doing nothing. So I do think that it's also good to, if there's nothing else going on in your area, if nobody's organizing and you have the time and like the capacity to start doing something, then I do think that it's worth it to sort of like, get an organization started. And so that can literally just be like you and like some other people that
Yeah.
like getting together and just like like picking like a topic to organize around. Like say that there's been like a wave of like anti-abortion legislation. It might be easier to just start with focusing on the anti-abortion legislation and then expand that once you've kind of like figured out like where your organization is at, sort of like expand that into organizing for like being more of like a general like workers organization or whatever.
I say for me, like for people getting that message across, um, I realize where you're at in terms of your education, and just know that being simply having like simply knowing what's right from wrong is let that be your guide. Also, in your organizing, and I say finding an organization that speaks to you would be my main things to get across. But also, if you're in a place right now where you're not also like heavily organizing or heavily doing community actions, just know where you're spending your time. I say is the main thing. Spend your time. If you're going to be on social media, just doing political. I don't want to say social media is really political activism. It's more like outreach in a way.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Be on social media all day. Make sure the content that you're engaging in your algorithm is something that is like politically getting perspectives that out there to the masses. Engage in content that is gonna make sure people are also educated. So maybe help out in that area. That would be my way of going about it. But also realizing where you're at, what more you need to do, and also taking the chances or starting your own if there's nothing around you. That's the main way I go about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Finding
The social media stuff, we call that brain nourishment as
brain.
opposed to brain rot.
It's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think y'all really have covered it. I think it's starting with education, and, like attending events locally, or even like there's a lot of resources that are offered nationally. You can look at like the People's Forum; they have courses. The Palestinian Youth Movement sometimes has courses, and these are like free and open to the public. So like look for these webinars and look for these things where you can start getting educated. And 1,000% agree, get plugged into an organization locally or nationally or however you want to go about it. Um, I think we started this conversation talking about like who is an activist and who calls themselves an activist and who, like organizer versus activist and those kinds of things. But I think ultimately, like, there's a place for everyone
Yeah.
in the struggle for liberation, right? Like, no matter
Mm-hmm.
how you contribute, no matter where you contribute, there is a place for everyone. So find that place and contribute.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I really like that addition a lot, and I want to change my answer a little bit, or like clarify. You do not have to like get started organizing like as an individual. You know what I mean? Like you're not gonna get anywhere like as an individual.
pretty
There are
difficult.
organizations like with national chapters, like Students for Justice in Palestine.
Yeah. Yeah. That was super great. Way to wrap up here. That is what you said last. Probably the thing I want people to like leave with is that there's a place for you everywhere. Everyone has their place in this global struggle. No one, like, we don't need everyone as the frontline fighter. Like, not everyone needs to be the guy who's going to throw the smoke canister back at the police. Like, finding where you fit in this is exactly where your role should be. And that's actually so what I like to end my podcast on and my essays on my Substack is always to do what you can. And like that comes from seeing it in the Boondocks. There was a conversation between Huey and my granddad. It's up on. But yeah, do what you can. That is a theme that I like to live by myself. It's obviously a matter of like finding out what you can do after that. But I want people to feel empowered to find what that is and find what their role is, whether it's locally or on a much larger scale.
Mhm.
And with that, I think we're gonna wrap here. Again, I want to thank y'all for being here so much. This was a super great conversation. I really enjoyed having y'all on. This was this was better than I could have imagined. So I want to thank y'all for being here.
Yeah, it was really great talking to y'all. I had a lot of fun.